I want you to imagine a scenario, right? You are running a business, and suddenly you are hit with a crisis.
Yeah, the worst nightmare.
Exactly. But, you don't panic. You pull out the emergency response manual, and you do everything entirely by the book.
Yeah.
You contain the threat, you call in the external experts, and you notify the government regulators right on schedule.
Right. You check every single box of the gold standard for crisis management.
Yeah. And you feel a sense of relief. You think you've successfully navigated the storm. But then, a few months later, you wake up, pour your coffee, and see your business plastered across the national news cycle. Like, you are being held up as a cautionary tale of a massive failure in duty of care.
I mean, it is the ultimate nightmare scenario for any organization because it really forces us to ask whether the quote-unquote book we are all supposed to follow is actually just broken.
And that is exactly what we are diving into today. Our sources for this deep dive are a really fascinating stack of documents. We are looking at technical cybersecurity teardowns, an investigative news report from the ABC featuring a pseudonymous victim, and some academic analyses from researchers at Murdoch University, RMIT, and UNSW.
Yeah, and all of this material centers around one specific cyber incident at a place called GO2 Health.
Right, which is a medical and veteran care clinic based in Everton Park up on the north side of Brisbane.
Yeah.
They operate a prominent program called Reforge, and they serve a massive community. I mean, over 14,000 patients, including more than 7,000 veterans.
Which, tells us right away that we are dealing with an organization handling incredibly sensitive, highly regulated data every single day.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the mission for our deep dives today is to really look past the surface of a data breach. This is not a Hollywood hacker story.
No, definitely not.
We are not analyzing some shadowy syndicate deploying sophisticated ransomware, encrypting servers, or, demanding millions in cryptocurrency. The inciting incident here is almost aggressively uninteresting.
Yeah, it really is.
It is just a boring tech issue.
Yeah.
Literally one person clicking one phishing email. But that single click exposes some glaring structural vulnerabilities in how almost every business, like your doctor, your accountant, the company you work for, handles data.
Right, because the technical breach itself is mundane. But the 12 weeks that followed the discovery of that breach, that is where the actual disaster unfolds and where the most valuable lessons are hidden.
So we need to start by looking at the actual mechanics of the hack, because understanding how unremarkable it was is kind of the baseline for everything that goes wrong later. In April of 2026, somebody at this clinic received a phishing email, and they clicked a link.
And that is the extent of the infiltration.
Just that.
Just that. An unauthorized party gained access to just one single internal mailbox.
And we should probably be specific about what kind of mailbox this was, right? It wasn't like the CEO's private account.
No, it wasn't the CEO's, it wasn't the chief medical officer's correspondence either. It was the general inbox. The one that usually starts with admin at or info at or reception at.
Right.
The mailbox where patients, referral agencies, and other clinics send their day-to-day general correspondence.
Wait, let me break this down. Because when I think of a medical clinic being hacked, my brain immediately pictures patient charts being downloaded from a secure server.
Yeah, that's what most people think.
But the sources are really clear that the clinic's primary practice management software was completely untouched. The clinical record system where the actual medical history is kept was never breached at all.
That is correct. In the cybersecurity industry, we classify this specific event as a standard business email compromise, or a BEC.
Okay, a BEC.
Right. And it is important to understand how a BEC functions mechanically, because this was almost certainly not a targeted, sophisticated campaign specifically aimed at stealing veteran data from GO2 Health.
So it's more like a random attack.
Yeah, it operates more like a spray and pray tactic. The attacker sends out thousands of fake emails, maybe disguised as a Microsoft 365 login alert or a fake invoice.
Oh, I get this all the time.
We all do. And one employee clicks the link, gets taken to a fake login page, and types in their credentials. The attacker harvests those credentials, logs into the actual webmail, and simply sits in that inbox.
They just sit there.
Yeah, often setting up forwarding rules to just monitor the traffic and see what rolls in.
Man, it's like spending a fortune on a high-tech, laser-guarded vault for all your most precious valuables. You make sure the combination is perfectly secure, the steel is impenetrable.
Right.
But then you leave a cardboard box completely full of your sensitive bank statements and old tax returns just sitting on the front porch. The vault did its job flawlessly, but you still handed over your identity to a passing thief.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the vulnerability here. You secure the primary asset, but you completely ignore the periphery.
Yeah.
Though we do need to recognize that GO2 Health's immediate response to this front porch theft was actually remarkably swift.
True. The timeline on day one is pretty solid. They discovered the unauthorized access on April 24th, and they contained it on that exact same day.
Yep, same day.
They immediately brought in external cybersecurity experts to investigate, and they even sent a preliminary alert to anyone who had received a secondary malicious phishing email originating from that compromised account.
Right, so on day one, their incident response is basically flawless.
But this raises an obvious contradiction for me. If that highly secured clinical database inside the vault wasn't touched, why did so much sensitive patient data actually get compromised? Like, how did that much information end up in the cardboard box on the porch in the first place?
Well, this brings us to the first major conceptual shift from our sources. We really have to change our definition of what a database is, because an inbox is a database.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it is just one you never intentionally designed, and therefore one you never properly manage.
I see where this is going. We treat general inboxes like the digital equivalent of that one junk drawer everybody has in their kitchen.
Exactly.
You throw old takeout menus, spare batteries, and maybe your passport in there just because you don't know where else to put them, assuming you'll sort it out later. But, like, nobody ever actually sorts the junk drawer.
Never. And in a busy medical practice, that digital junk drawer accumulates an astonishing amount of sensitive material over a decade.
Because people are just emailing stuff in, right?
Right. Patients email in with completed intake forms attached as PDFs. Government agencies send through claim details. Specialists forward referral files.
Yeah.
And none of this information is classified. It isn't tagged with security controls. It simply piles up in the admin at inbox.
And for GO2 Health, because a massive portion of their patient base consists of veterans, Department of Veterans Affairs or DVA identification numbers are just flowing constantly through that general inbox.
Constantly.
There is a really striking detail in the ABC News report that just brings this to life. The journalist spoke to an affected veteran, a patient who had been receiving psychological treatment at the clinic.
Right. And she was speaking pseudonymously to protect her identity.
Yes, but she stated explicitly that she had sent, and this is a direct quote, extremely personal and extremely sensitive information about her care directly to that general email address.
Her assumption was entirely logical, though. I mean, when you are interacting with a healthcare provider, you naturally assume that any communication channel they provide is protected by the same standard of medical confidentiality as the doctor's physical office itself.
Right, of course you would.
But the reality of email infrastructure is that it treats a highly sensitive psychological update the exact same way it treats a newsletter subscription.
That's terrifying. But the breach didn't actually expose a full decade's worth of this sensitive data, did it? I remember the sources showing the damage was capped.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is how that happened. We find this incredible piece of accidental security. The single best mitigation factor in this entire incident was almost certainly never intended to be a security control at all.
Wait, really? What was it?
Because the general mailbox had an auto-archive feature turned on, the attacker only had access to the previous 12 months of emails.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, anything older than a year had been automatically swept into an inaccessible archive. We call this limiting the blast radius.
Hold on. I have to push back a little on labeling that as security control. Let's be real. Nobody in a small business turns on auto-archive to thwart international cyber criminals.
Fair point.
You turn on auto-archive because your email provider starts flashing these red warnings that your storage quota is at 99% and you can't receive any more messages. That isn't a deliberate cybersecurity strategy, it's just boring digital housekeeping.
It is entirely housekeeping. But if we look at the mechanics of risk, mail retention limits are arguably the cheapest, lowest effort, and highest leverage security changes any organization can make.
Is deleting old email.
Exactly. If your shared mailboxes have unlimited retention, you have actively chosen unlimited exposure. By simply allowing an automated rule to archive or delete anything older than 12 months, you instantly reduce your risk footprint by orders of magnitude without spending a dime on complex security software.
Okay, so let's summarize the timeline so far. The blast radius was limited to 12 months because of a housekeeping rule. They caught the breach on the same day it happened. They contained it immediately, and they brought in the experts.
Right.
From a technical standpoint, this sounds like a massive victory. So how on earth does this snowball into a national scandal on the ABC?
Well, the transition from a technical win to a reputational disaster comes down to the timeline of notification. And this timeline exposes a massive structural friction between legal compliance and human care.
Okay, how so?
To understand this, we have to look at the regulatory framework. In Australia, this is governed by the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme under the Privacy Act.
What does that scheme actually demand of a business when they get hacked? Like, what are the rules?
When an organization discovers a breach, the clock starts ticking. They are legally granted up to 30 days to conduct an assessment.
30 days. Got it.
The goal of that assessment is to determine if the breach is likely to result in serious harm to any individuals. If they conclude that serious harm is likely, they must notify the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, the OAIC, and the affected individuals.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at GO2 Health's dates. They discovered the breach on April 24th. The sources show they officially notified the OAIC and the Australian Cybersecurity Centre on May 18th.
Which is 24 days later.
Right. So, strictly legally speaking, they met their statutory obligation with time to spare. They played completely by the book.
They fulfilled the regulatory requirement for notifying the government, yes. But here's the critical failure point. They told the government on May 18th. When do you think they told the patients?
You mean the actual veterans whose sensitive psychological data and DVA numbers were sitting in that compromised inbox?
Yes. When did they find out?
The sources say July 16th. That is 12 weeks.
Yep.
Nearly 3 full months after they discovered an unauthorized person in their system. And they only told the patients a matter of days before the ABC broke the story nationally on July 21st.
The optics on that are, well, terrible.
Seriously.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at that timeline, my immediate deduction is that they were trying to cover their tracks. Sweeping it under the rug and hoping nobody would notice until the journalists started asking questions.
It is the most natural conclusion to jump to. But to understand the true complexity of incident response, we really have to examine the clinic's defense because it highlights a genuine operational dilemma.
Okay, what was their argument?
Their argument was that forensic investigations of this nature are painstakingly slow. They were trying to identify precisely which individuals were affected.
But why does it take 3 months to figure out whose emails were in an inbox? Can't they just, run a search?
Let's think about the mechanics of e-discovery on an unstructured inbox. It is not like querying a neat, organized spreadsheet where you can just filter by column.
Oh, right. It's just a pile of random emails.
Exactly. You have to run keyword searches. You have to open attachments manually. If you find a DVA number in an email, you have to read the context to verify if that number belongs to the sender or perhaps their spouse or a dependent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Then you have to match that number back to a current patient record to find a valid contact address. It is entirely manual, contextual verification, and it takes an agonizing amount of time.
I see the mechanical difficulty there. But for 3 months, the victims are completely flying blind.
That is the core tension. The clinic argued that they wanted to avoid causing undue panic.
Undue panic.
Yeah, if you notify too early, before the audit is finished, you might needlessly terrify thousands of veterans who actually had no data exposed. Or you might give people inaccurate information about what specific data of theirs was stolen, which causes a different kind of panic. Regulators generally prefer accuracy to prevent a wave of false alarms.
I understand the desire for accuracy.
Yeah.
But put yourself in that veteran's shoes. For 3 months, you are using your credit card, you are logging into your government portals, completely unaware that a cyber criminal might possess the exact documentation needed to open a line of credit in your name or intercept your medical benefits.
It's a scary thought.
The veteran patient argued exactly this to the ABC. By choosing to wait for perfect accuracy, the clinic actively robbed the patients of the time they needed to defend themselves.
It is a devastating critique, and it points to a flaw in how organizations interpret these rules. The statutory 30 days is often treated as the timeline for all communication.
Right.
But there is a practical solution to this dilemma that balances the need for regulatory accuracy with the moral duty of care.
There has to be a middle ground. I mean, if the law encourages you to take weeks to be accurate, but the victim needs to know on day 1 to protect their bank account, why not just send a preliminary heads up immediately?
What would that look like?
A message that essentially says, hey, we have detected a breach. We're still auditing to find out exactly what happened, but be on high alert. And then follow up later with the specific details.
You have just outlined exactly what the cybersecurity industry calls a 2-stage notification strategy.
Oh, so it's a real thing.
It is, and it solves the friction entirely. Stage 1 is early, broad, and prioritizes vigilance over precision. You inform your community that an incident occurred and tell them what generic phishing attempts or scams to watch out for.
Giving them the heads up.
Then stage 2 arrives weeks later after the painstaking e-discovery is complete. Providing highly precise details to the specific individuals affected, you get the benefit of early warning without the liability of long-term inaccuracy.
And most importantly, you don't end up on the national news as the clinic that hid a data breach for 3 months.
Exactly.
But let's say it is finally July 16th. You get the delayed notification email. You would think the waiting was the hard part.
Unfortunately, no.
Right, because receiving that notification just kicks off a completely different and arguably worse nightmare regarding what data was actually inside that inbox.
This transitions us to a massive liability for businesses that hold third-party data. The compromised information didn't just belong to the clinic.
No. The sources detailed that the exposed data included Medicare numbers, concession cards, and DVA numbers.
Which are government identifiers.
Exactly. You cannot just click a link and reset a DVA number the way you reset a Netflix password. Imagine if I borrowed your wallet and then I lost it on the subway. I can apologize profusely, but I can't call your bank and cancel your credit cards for you.
Right, you have to do all that heavy lifting yourself.
And when you ask me for the phone number for your bank, I just shrug and say, I don't know.
That analogy perfectly captures the frustration of the victims here. A deeply telling detail emerged in the ABC report. The affected patient actually reached out to GO2 Health after receiving the notification.
Oh, really? What did she ask?
She explicitly asked them, "Do I need to replace my DVA card?"
And what did they say?
She received no reply.
Wow. No reply at all, which, again, I really doubt was malicious on the part of the clinic. They were probably drowning in thousands of panicked emails from other veterans.
It wasn't malice, no. It was a profound lack of peacetime preparation. Nobody at the clinic knew the answer to her question because nobody had ever needed to find out the mechanism for replacing a compromised DVA card en masse.
But if your psychologist's office just informed you that your most sensitive data is in the hands of criminals, and then they completely ignore your basic question about how to fix it, that lack of preparation feels an awful lot like abandonment.
Which is exactly why the operational solution has to happen long before a breach ever occurs. If your business requires you to hold government identifiers, you must document the remediation pathways in peacetime.
What does that entail?
It takes a single afternoon on a random Tuesday to call Medicare, or the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the Passport Office, and just ask, if our clients' cars are compromised in a cyber incident, what is the exact step-by-step process for them to replace it?
Right.
What specific phone number do they call? Is there a replacement fee?
Because doing that kind of bureaucratic research on day 3 of a cyber crisis, while the media is calling, the lawyers are drafting statements, and patients are demanding answers, is structurally impossible.
Exactly. But if you already have that remediation document drafted and sitting on your server, you simply attach it to your notification letter.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Suddenly, the communication shifts from a panic-inducing, "we lost your data, good luck," to a reassuring, "we experienced an incident, but here's the exact verified action plan you need to follow to protect yourself." It changes the entire relationship with the victim.
We are dissecting the failures of this clinic pretty intensely, but I want to zoom out and look at the broader context of the sources, because this brings us to a structural reality of the modern economy.
Right.
Why was all of this so incredibly difficult for GO2 Health to navigate? I mean, they aren't a massive tech conglomerate with a dedicated floor of cybersecurity analysts monitoring threats around the clock.
No, they're a relatively small operation, and the academic sources from Murdoch University, RMIT, and UNSW highlight that this incident is a symptom of a much larger structural mismatch.
A structural mismatch.
Yes. Across the economy, small businesses are holding massive amounts of highly sensitive data, but their internal capabilities do not match the risk profile of that data.
Let's think about the mechanics of a small clinic's IT infrastructure for a second. They likely don't have a chief information security officer.
Very unlikely.
They probably just contract a local external IT provider whose primary job is making sure the Wi-Fi works, the printers connect, and the Office 365 licenses are paid. Yet, they hold data that is just as sensitive as a major hospital network.
The academics argue that smaller operators, whether they are allied health professionals, local law firms, or suburban accounting practices, simply lack the capacity to defend against modern cyber threats. And the statistics from the OAIC bear this out aggressively.
Let's look at those numbers, actually. The OAIC's own figures from last year show there were 1,205 notified data breaches.
Wow.
And of those, 716 were the result of malicious or criminal activity. And the sector most heavily affected, health service providers, accounting for 19% of all notifications.
19%. And as the OAIC spokesperson pointed out in the sources, health data is categorized as one of the most sensitive types of information under the Privacy Act. The damage potential is astronomically higher than a simple credit card leak.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Even if you don't run a medical clinic or a law firm, this structural mismatch directly impacts your life.
Absolutely.
Think about the local tax accountant who has your entire financial history on their server. Think about the migration agent who requested high-resolution scans of your passport and birth certificate. Think about the small disability provider coordinating your care.
Right, you are constantly handing your most sensitive, hard-to-replace data to small operators.
And their biggest vulnerability isn't some complex firewall configuration that requires a hacker to crack a mainframe. It's the fact that their front reception email inbox is an unmanaged database.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the overarching takeaway from these sources is that in our current digital landscape, cybersecurity is no longer just an IT question about software. It is a fundamental duty of care question.
That's a great way to put it.
If a business takes on the responsibility of holding someone's sensitive data, they take on the non-negotiable duty to protect it, even if they're only a 3-person operation.
Let's pull all of this together and look at the major actionable takeaways from the deep dive. First, audit your shared mailboxes. That admin at address is a database. You have to treat it like one.
Yep, essential.
Second, implement retention limits. Auto-archive isn't just to save space, it is your best tool for limiting the blast radius of a breach. Third, if the worst does happen, you need a 2-stage communication strategy so you aren't leaving your clients flying blind for 3 months.
Exactly.
Fourth, figure out the ID replacement pathways for your specific industry before an incident occurs. And finally, treat that 30-day regulatory notification clock as the absolute floor of your obligations to the government, not the ceiling of your obligations to your clients.
If an organization implements those 5 steps, a boring technical failure, like a clicked phishing link, remains a boring technical failure, rather than escalating into a national scandal.
I know I am certainly going to think twice the next time I casually attach a sensitive PDF to an email bound for a general admin address. I now know that document might just sit in their digital junk drawer, waiting for a spray-and-pray phishing attack for the next 10 years.
It absolutely will sit there. And if we connect all these threads, it leaves us with a provocative question to mull over.
Oh.
We've established that standard email infrastructure is inherently an unmanaged database. And we've seen how current government compliance regulations, like the 30-day rule, can unintentionally incentivize businesses to remain silent while they conduct painstaking e-discovery.
Right, prioritizing perfect accuracy for the regulator over immediate warning for the victim.
Exactly. It creates a scenario where you can do everything by the book, follow the regulatory timeline perfectly, and the patients still suffer the most damage.
Which is a terrible outcome.
Which raises the ultimate question. Are we regulating the wrong part of the incident timeline? Should the law perhaps focus less on the exact deadline for when the government receives a perfectly accurate forensic report and focus much more heavily on mandating when the victim gets the necessary immediate heads up to actually defend themselves?
It really makes you wonder. If you follow the fire drill perfectly, but you don't tell the people inside the building that there's smoke until you know exactly which room the fire started in, did the manual really work? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.